Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian, and today I am taking a look at three different iterations of the W.F. Bern Browning pistol, or the W.F. Browning as it was known, also known as the W.F. Bern P43 or Pistol 43. The background to this story is that the Swiss military had adopted the Luger pistol, and that was their self-loader. They went from some revolvers to the Luger. And the Luger served them very well. They liked it. They especially liked its accuracy. The Swiss are big on accurate guns. The problem with the Luger was that it was expensive. It had some issues with reliability, but in general, it was just costly. And they kind of got tired of paying for Lugers, when eventually there are a lot of other much less expensive self-loading pistols available on the market. So finally, actually at first, they ran some experiments on trying to simplify and cheapen their Lugers, make them a little less expensive to manufacture. And they were able to reduce the cost a bit, but not really enough to satisfy the army. So by 1940, they started putting out a tender for a replacement self-loading pistol for the Swiss military. And in 1940, the very first trial was only two guns, apparently. It was a Sig pistol designed by Charles Petter, which interestingly, that's what was ultimately adopted in the form of the Sig P210 or P49. But they had a Sig Petter prototype pistol in 1940, and they had a Spanish Astra 900, which is very similar to a broom handle Mauser externally. And they ran a few quick tests and immediately threw out the Astra because for practical matters, it was the same as the C96 broom handle. And that whole style of pistol was obsolete at this point. So in 1941, they held a second trial, and in this second trial, they had a lot more competitive pistols. So they had a Sig Petter prototype again. They had a Colt, probably a 38 Super Colt. They had one of the French Model 1935A pistols, which is, again, another Petter design. The French adopted this development from the same designer. They had one of these Brownings from Bern. They had a Polish WZ-35, a Vis-35, commonly known here as a Radom, and I think one or two other pistols as well. They had really quite a large field. And they ended up running various pistol tests and demonstrations until ultimately in 1949, they finally picked a winner. And the winner was the Sig pistol, the Petter-designed pistol, which they adopted as the P49, also known as the Sig P210. Absolutely magnificent handgun. However, one of the competitors that really hung in that race pretty well and through almost the entire duration was the W.F. Bern, or Waffenfabrik Bern, series of Browning-based pistols. These were the last competitor to the Sig to finally get eliminated from the competition. And Bern went through a whole series of pistols. They ultimately made something like 55 or so. They did not hit serial number 60. What's kind of cool is all of their prototypes for this testing program were a single continuous serial number range. So by looking at the serial number of any of these different types of gun, you can immediately determine where it fell in the development process. So today, I have here a standard Browning high power, which we'll use as a comparison model because these are all based very heavily on the high power. And then we have number 9, which is very similar to a high power. And we have number 37 and number 40, which are farther away from the high power. Now, interestingly, at the very end of this trial in 1947, Bern actually came up with a different style of pistol called the P47, which was a gas-retarded blowback mechanism, kind of similar to what you get in the HK P7 a couple decades later. And they made 10 of those right at the end of this trial. So this number 40 is right just about the very last of the Bern prototype Browning pistols before they, for some reason, and I don't know exactly why, changed over to this gas-delayed system. We'll take a look at the gas-delayed gun in more detail later. For now, let's just take a look at the Browning high-power family here. All right, to start off, let's just take a quick look at the Browning high-power because this really is the fundamental basis for all of these Bern prototype guns. So, pull the magazine out. Now the high power is directly derived from the Browning model of 1911. Browning himself was working on this pistol when he died. The idea, of course, was to take his basic locking mechanism, make it a little more efficient and improve it, and couple it with a high-capacity double-stack magazine in the 9mm Parabellum cartridge. So he had a 13-round capacity. This pistol was finished by his Belgian protege, really, Dudion Saif, who finished this, and it was ultimately adopted by a number of countries in the 1930s. So the improvements he made were to replace the swinging toggle link in the Browning barrel with a slot acting on a cammed surface. Makes it substantially easier to assemble or to manufacture. We have our recoil spring here. The barrel, same sort of locking lugs that lock into the top of the slide. So one other interesting development of the Browning High Power was the firing mechanism. When you pull the trigger, you're raising this little peg right here, and only doing that. On the 1911, you had a yoke running around the magazine well assembly that did stuff in the back. On the High Power, you have a bar that raises up right there. That then connects to this pivoting transfer bar in the slide right here. So when you lift up on this end, it pushes down on that end. And when the back end of that transfer bar pushes down, it pushes down on this piece right here, which releases the hammer. So kind of a simplified firing mechanism, and an interesting one that operates up through the slide and then back down. So that's the Browning High Power. Now, the first of these Bern prototypes that we're going to take a look at is serial number 9 here. And while it has a distinctive shape to it, largely because it's got this big rounded bell at the back of the slide, the similarity to the Browning High Power is pretty apparent. If we just look at the frames here, you can see the grip panels are very similar in shape. Triggers are very similar in shape, and just the overall profile of the gun. The front of the slide here, the similarity is pretty obvious. In fact, interestingly, it is so similar that the SIG has this 13-round magazine, and I can take a Browning High Power magazine, insert it in. It's just a couple millimeters longer than the Bern magazine, but it locks open and functions. So, as of serial number 9, the Bern pistols were still close enough to their original high-power DNA that they could use interchangeable magazines. Now, on serial number 9, they have added a grip safety to the gun. That didn't last very long. There are very few of these that actually show that grip safety. And by the time we get to our next example in the mid-30s, the grip safety is long gone. The safety catch on number 9 here is identical to a Browning High Power. See that? And of course it has the external slide lock and slide release, just like a Browning High Power. All right, now things are going to change a bit. We've got a fairly big gap here between 9 up here and 37. But what happened in the interim was that the guns got a little bit bigger, and some of the potential flaws or improvable areas of the Browning High Power got addressed. So you can see that the frame is larger. And what they did at the same time was they increased the magazine size. So this now has a 16-round magazine instead of 13, and the magazine style has changed substantially. So we've gone from what is a very basic, obviously a high-power magazine, to something that's a little taller, a little beefier. It's got an open slot in the side so you can see how many rounds are loaded. Still locks up the same way, but this is obviously no longer interchangeable. The safety on number 37 here has evolved into a much larger lever, so much easier to adjust, to hit with the thumb on and off, as compared to a Browning High Power style safety, which can be done, but it's much smaller and takes a little bit more practice or concentration to use. However, we still have this same style of external slide stop or slide release. Profile of the muzzle is the same. The sights themselves have also gotten substantially bigger. So you can see on the right, serial number 9 has these fairly small sights. Serial number 37 on the left has much bigger sights. That rear notch is about twice the size now. that'll make the gun a little bit easier to shoot as a practical matter. Now it's also interesting to notice that this new frame that SIG was making here, and I've seen this on another one of the pistols, serial number 35, is basically identical to this example. You can see that there's a rough surface to the frame, and we can see it in the front of the trigger guard, the front strap, the back strap here. We can see it, let's see where else, right up in here. This is actually a rough, unfinished casting. So they didn't put enough extra dimensional material in the casting to machine it all down. Instead, they made the casting the exact size of the finished component and left it with this somewhat rough surface. In some ways, that actually kind of gives you some gripping texture to the gun. I suspect it was also due to the fact that these were prototype test pistols, and maybe they just didn't really need to have the level of workmanship involved in finishing down a surface like this that serves no mechanical purpose. So these frames, like I said, 35 and this example number 37, both have this unfinished casting for the frame. And again, the internals are exactly like the high power. All right, when we get to the very last pistol, serial number 40, it pretty much, at first glance, it looks like it's the same. However, we have a significant difference right here. The mags are the same, the grips are the same, the frames are the same, the slides are the same. However, where number 37 has a high power style external slide release and slide catch, the serial number 40 has an internal slide hold open, and it has no slide release control on the outside. Instead, it just has this disassembly catch. This is actually straight off of a design from Josef Nickel, which you will find on the CZ24 and 27 pistols, for example, where it's just a cross pin, but in order to take it out, you have to push this button in, which allows you to then slide this part of the pin down. That pin is dovetailed on the bottom to lock it in place until you slide it down, and then you can just pull it straight out. Now the interesting thing about this is, once we have the magazine out, you don't actually have to lock the slide open in order to disassemble this example. You just pull that pin out, and then the slide comes right off the front. Now this does have an internal hold open. Unfortunately, it's a bit worn, and it doesn't function quite right. You can feel, when you rack the slide with an empty mag, you can feel the slide catch when it's supposed to stay, and then it bumps over the hold open and closes. Just the spring pressure in the slide is too high for the somewhat worn slide stop. So we have our Bern P43 or W+F Browning pistol number 40 up here, and our actual Browning high power down here, and you can see the internal mechanism is mechanically exactly the same between the two. We still have the transfer bar in the slide. It is a slightly different shape, but it works exactly the same way. So, pretty darn slick. One other distinguishing feature we can see on serial number 40 is that we no longer have this rough cast frame. Instead, the frame has been finished smooth, and these vertical serrations have been added both to the back strap and to the front strap. So they put a little more care, a little more work into finishing this slightly later version of the pistol. Now, a couple differences that we can look at inside the frames that are worth noting. For one thing, you can see this little lever right on the right side of the frame of number 37 here, which is not present in 40. That is the magazine hold open. So the way that works is that when I put in a full magazine, the follower lifts this little latch up, and that is what locks the slide in place. So if I push the follower down as if I have a cartridge in it, you can see that that little latch has disappeared, and when I let the follower up, that latch comes up. It doesn't come up very far, just far enough to grab the slide and prevent it from going forward. All right, let's look at a couple elements on the frames of these two late pistols. Now, we know that they're going to have totally separate mechanisms for the slide hold open, because on 37, the early one, that external lever is the slide stop. You push it down to release the slide, and it's pushed up by spring pressure and latches the slide open. On the late gun, number 40, there is no lever to do that work. We just have this disassembly pin. So you need some sort of internal mechanism that can take a loaded or an empty magazine and force it to hold the slide open. The way they did that was to add this little spring-loaded lever and tab just on the inside of the right of the magazine well, so that when I put a magazine in, an empty one, it lifts that little tab up just a little bit. That tab engages in this little slot in the slide and locks the slide in place. Fits right there. So that's how the slide hold open is done without the external lever. Now, as a result, there is no manual slide release. Instead, to release the slide, you have to drop the magazine and then rack the slide and it will go forward. One other change that was made, now again, we're looking at the early pistol, number 37. It has a magazine safety, kind of like a Browning high power, and that safety is this piece, spring-loaded plunger, down here. So if I know it's hard to see down in there, but if I try and pull the trigger without that being depressed, nothing happens. The trigger's just locked in place. Once I push that in, now pulling the trigger causes this connector to rise up, which is what you need to do to fire the gun. So that's how the magazine safety works. On this one, number 40, the late gun, we have a different type of magazine safety. This is our connector that hits the transfer bar in the slide, and if I don't have a magazine in there, it's just kind of pointing backwards. Once I do push the magazine in, you can see that the magazine pushes this transfer piece into a vertical position, and then it will lift up straight when you pull the trigger, hit that transfer bar, and fire the gun. Why exactly they changed that mechanism, I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to notice. Thank you for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Get a little background here for you on where the SIG P210 came from. More specifically, the competitors that it faced off and won against. I think these are pretty cool. The Browning high power is a pretty iconic pistol, and it's neat to take a look at what Swiss development thought would be improvements to the high power. So, if you enjoyed this sort of work, please consider checking out my Patreon page and helping to support me in doing this. A pledge of $1 a month really goes a long way to help me continue to go out there and find interesting test pistols like this to bring to you. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.